And Arendt's, one of her central theses, is that's just not true. Life includes the emergence of things that are entirely new. The political world, this world, involves the emergence of things that are entirely new, and politics will always essentially be about responding to these new emergent phenomena, responding to newness. And so totalitarianism is the worst possible form of government because it is incapable of responding to newness, of having genuine discourse about the birth of something emergent and new. Uh, and this is going to be one of her critiques of Marx also, right? That Marxism uh, has a totalitarian bent. And of course, this is probably the number one critique of Marx that you'll hear, right? Marxism leads to totalitarianism. Marxism leads to fascism. We saw it in the Soviet Union, we saw it in China, we saw it in Cuba. And it's certainly a problem that we need to think about when it comes to Marx. And I think that Arendt's critique is one of the better ways to critique Marx on that point. Now, I think we will have the opportunity to discuss how we can adapt Marxist thinking to account for this idea of novelty and newness that belongs to Arendt, and to think about Marx in a way that will eschew, avoid this totalitarian tendency or possibility. And as we'll see, I'm already going way too long talking about this. We've barely even begun. But as we'll see, socialism is, in many senses, the way that Marxist thought is adapted so as to allow for a little bit more, considerably more individualism, dynamism, the capacity to change, respond to newness, and to avoid totalitarianism, to include a measure of free enterprise and capitalism. So socialism is kind of specifically anti-totalitarian version of Marxist thinking. Now, there are other ways that we can fight back about this tendency toward totalitarianism. In Russia, and in many, or rather in Soviet Russia, and in many other communist countries in the 20th century, there was an idea of perpetual revolution. And that thought was also about constantly responding to newness, constantly avoiding totalitarianism, fighting the idea of a politics that would work as a machine by understanding politics more as perpetual revolution, a kind of constant contact with the anarchic origins of life and being, and that is going to be more of the sort of anarchist side of Marxism. So we have sort of socialist, more state and electorally oriented Marxists, and then we have anti-state, more anarchist oriented Marxists. And that's a split within Marxism. Marxism is not monolithic, right? So, all right, this is a sort of just general introduction to some thoughts about Marxism, but I guess I want to mention a couple more things that Arendt is thinking about as critiques of Marx and responding to them. These are critiques that that Arendt is not particularly sympathetic to, right? That she will defend Marx from. And the first of these is that Marxism is an ideology for the lazy, right? That communism is for those who don't want to work, right? And we can see maybe why even people who are familiar with Marx would think this, right? Because the goal of communism is to eradicate labor and to free up the working classes, all people, to have leisure. So, right, we hear Marxists are lazy. They just don't want to work. They want everything given to them. They want the state to provide everything for them. Well, right, we might ask, who wants you to work in the first place? Why do we shame people for not wanting to work? And is it really the case that our only motivation for work, and maybe I've mentioned this before, our only motivation for work is money, right? That if we aren't working for wages, we won't work at all, right? If you want to work, there's no one stopping you from working, right? But if you don't want to work, why should you be forced to work? Where's the ideal of hard working, or of being hardworking? Where does the value of productivity come from? Right? Do you actually want to work? Or do you want to work in order to achieve leisure, in order to get to a place where you no longer have to work? And perhaps the ideal, the value of productivity and of being hardworking is one that is handed down by the managerial class. Who wants you to work? Your boss wants you to work, right? And so just as the noble class in Nietzsche imposed its values on the oppressed about what's good and true, Marx is also saying, right, this value of being hardworking is one that serves not you, but the people that you work for, who profit from your work. Now, Arendt thinks that this charge then of laziness is false, because Marx does think that it is labor, work, that is essential to being human, and that when we are forced to work for other people, we are, right, that makes us lazy. Right? We're only lazy when the work that we're doing is for other people. When we are working for ourselves, we're inspired to work. And so, in fact, if we were not working for other people but working for ourselves, we would be less lazy. We'd be more involved in our own essential being as workers. So Arendt thinks Marx puts too high a value on work and labor for it to make any sense. To accuse Marxists of being lazy, that accusation comes only from the elite ruling class, the capitalist class, the managers and owning class, who want to keep you working because it benefits them. It's not about Marxists being lazy, it's about Marxists challenging their own ability to not work themselves, their own privilege and leisure time. The second thing that Marxists are often accused of that Arendt wants to defend a little bit is the idea of violence. Right? Marx thinks that violence is sometimes necessary, right? That violent revolution is the way that you achieve historical change. Right? There has never been a major change in the political order without violent revolution. And therefore, violence is sometimes justified. Sometimes violence is necessary. Sometimes violence is the only answer. And I think we can think of other examples where violence has been justifiably invoked as a possibility for political change. Right? I have in mind, for example, maybe I've mentioned this essay before, or a speech by Malcolm X called "The Ballot or the Bullet," right, where he says very explicitly, right, either we are going to get political change through electoral means, through voting, or we are going to get political change through violent revolution. Right? Where violent revolution was a justifiable possibility in order to overturn the status quo in the 1950s of segregation, of legalized voter suppression, and the legalized disenfranchisement of Black Americans across the board. Right? If there is no